Well, good morning, Bethel. Thanks for choosing chapel this morning. Truly is a joy to be together. My name is Nick. I serve as one of our campus pastors here at Bethel, and we are going to continue our semester-long series this morning called Living the Good Life, the gospel according to Matthew. But one thing that we wanted to share with you this morning as we get kicked off, as we were preparing to study the gospel of Matthew all semester long, and this concept of living the good life, it was so important to us that we not just learn about the good life, but that we actually live it out, right? You guys hear us say it all the time from this stage. Our goal is that this campus, that Bethel, would look like heaven more and more every single day. And so it's not good enough to just learn about the good life. We have to live it out. And so what we want to introduce to you this morning is something that we're going to do for the rest of the semester, and we hope it's really exciting and engaging and encouraging, is we're going to start to teach from the chapel stage every single week a spiritual practice on how we can actually live this thing out, how we can actually make your lives and our community's lives look more like the kingdom of God. And so what that's going to look like is every week going forward, in addition to kind of our chapel message on the Gospel of Matthew, we're going to have one chapel message that's all about a specific spiritual practice. And it won't end here, right? In chapel, we'll have posters up all over campus letting you know what the spiritual practice is. If you go on our Campus Ministries app, if you have a phone and want to download it, we're going to throw up the QR code again, or just search either Apple Store or Google Store for the Campus Ministries app for Bethel University. There will be a spiritual practice video every single week. There will be a spiritual practice guide in our study guide section. And our encouragement is that you would follow along week by week. Maybe it's in a small group, maybe it's by yourself, to say, what would this look like if I brought some of these spiritual practices into my life to actually live this thing out? And it's this cool thing, Chris just talked about it as we were worshiping together, that this understanding of the good life would start to bubble up in our hearts, but then start to spill out into our lives, into our actions, into the relationships in this world together. That's our prayer. And so hopefully week by week, we're excited to do that alongside you. So to kick us off with an overview of what this looks like, spiritual practices in our Bethel community, please welcome your pastor for discipleship, Sara Richards.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. It feels good to be here on a Monday finally, right? We've had 2 Mondays where I haven't been to come to chapel. I'm excited to be here. So if you don't know yet, if you haven't noticed, we are in a series called Living the Good Life. And we have been learning all about what Jesus defines is the good life. And we've learned that that is different than what the world around us tells us the good life is, right? And as Pastor Nick has explained during the last few chapels, when Jesus came to earth, to live among us, to be with us, he brought a new kingdom to earth. He brought a new way to live. And because Jesus brought that kingdom to earth, we don't have to wait until we get to heaven to be a part of God's kingdom. We have the opportunity to choose to live in God's kingdom right here and now. Living the good life also means that we get to choose to live our lives in God's kingdom as disciples or apprentices of Jesus right here and now. And a disciple is someone who follows a teacher, and they learn from that teacher, but they don't just learn from that teacher, they adopt that teacher's way of life. And so as a disciple of Jesus, that is someone who spends time with him, learns from him, does the things he did, and lives their life in a way that looks like how Jesus lived his. But friends, here's the problem. So many of us make the decision to follow Jesus, which is an awesome decision, but then we stop there. We trust God to get us into heaven someday, but our everyday, ordinary lives don't really look any different from the people around us. So you might be thinking, well, I want to follow Jesus, but do I really have to follow with my whole life? Do I really have to live my entire life as a disciple? Isn't it just good enough to go to church on Sunday or to come to chapel on Mondays and Wednesdays and then just to kind of do whatever I want the rest of the week? Maybe that's you. Or maybe you're thinking, I really want to live the good life, but I don't know what it even means or looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. Or you might be someone who really, really wants to do the things that Jesus did and to become more like Jesus, and you're trying really hard to do that, but you just can't seem to do it. Well, discipleship or apprenticeship to Jesus, I like to use the term apprenticeship, which you'll hear about later, that requires our intention. We have to intend or choose to be his disciple or his apprentice. We have to choose and intend to live in his kingdom and not our own kingdom. Our intentions matter, you guys. So if I don't intend to eat lunch today, I'm probably not going to eat lunch today. Or if I don't intend or choose to stop scrolling on my phone, I probably am not going to stop scrolling on my phone. I have to intend to do that. If we don't intend to be a disciple of Jesus or an apprentice of Jesus, we won't be. And friends, this intention or this decision to be a disciple is a much bigger decision than just deciding to follow Jesus to get into heaven someday. That's a huge part of it, but that's not all there is. To be an apprentice of Jesus requires that we reorient our entire lives to learn and to train to live the way that Jesus lived. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you've ever heard of how someone becomes an apprentice or an electrician's apprentice, it's actually a helpful way to think about being an apprentice of Jesus. So if you wanted to become an electrician, you would first have to make the choice and choose and intend to be an electrician, and then you would have to spend years learning and training as an electrician's apprentice. But you would always be under the supervision of a licensed or a master electrician. And as an apprentice, you would watch how that master electrician does things. You would pay attention to even the tiniest detail of how they did the work. It's kind of important when you're want to be an electrician, right? Your life might be on the line. So you pay attention to how they are doing things, and then you try to do things the way they do them, but under the master electrician's supervision. And that's what Jesus did with his disciples, right, friends? He invited them to follow him, and then they had to make a choice. They had to decide, do I want to be a disciple of Jesus? So they had to set their intention to follow him. And then they spent time with him. They spent hours every day with him, eating with him, walking with him, working with him, learning from him. And eventually, Jesus sent them out to do what he did, to teach, to minister to people, and to make apprentices or disciples themselves. Jesus is our master teacher. And when we decide to be a disciple or an apprentice of Jesus, we choose to spend time with him, to abide in him. We study how he lived his life. We do the things the way Jesus would do them if he were us. We live our whole lives, every part of our lives, yoked with him, right? Linked arm in arm with Jesus, so that we can continually walk and work with Jesus. And as a disciple of Jesus, we will take very seriously the command that he gives us in Matthew 28:19-20, where he says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." And friends, as we do this, as we live the good life as a disciple of Jesus, people will start to notice this. They will see something different in this. One of my favorite authors, his name is Dallas Willard, he says that a light bulb doesn't announce to everyone they're a light bulb. They just shine their light. Friends, if we follow Jesus and are a disciple of Jesus and we are living the good life, people will see that shining through us. They will see Jesus shining through us. They will want to be a part of it. They will ask us questions and we'll be so excited to be able to invite them into learning and living with Jesus. We become apprentices who point other people to Jesus, and hopefully those people will become apprentices who point others to Jesus. When we make the decision to be an apprentice, we also commit to being intentional about the role that we play in our own spiritual transformation. We cannot just sit back, relax, and expect to become a disciple or expect to become more like Jesus. It's not going to work. And whether we realize it or not, friends, we are all being formed by the books we read, the things we watch, the apps we have on our phones, by the relationships we have, the experiences we go through. And the question isn't if we're being formed, it's how we're being formed. Then we can let those influences unintentionally form us or shape us, or we can choose to be intentional about how we are being transformed. We can be intentional about how, but God is the only one who actually transforms us. He does the heavy lifting in our transformation. But he hasn't left us alone to do that. He's given us tools that we can use to put ourselves in a position where he can change and form us. So for instance, if we look at Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, Paul tells us to offer our bodies to God so that we can be transformed. He says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." Spiritual disciplines, or as I like to call them, spiritual practices, are tools that God has given us to offer our bodies to God so that we can be transformed. God made us to live in a body, and we can use those in our own transformation. Every spiritual practice is a bodily exercise that we offer to God, and when we practice these spiritual practices in our bodies, our minds are actually renewed, and then we will eventually and gradually be transformed. Spiritual practices are activities we participate, then open us to God's grace and to his transforming work in us. One of my favorite authors and teachers, Dallas Willard, he defines grace as the God acting in our lives to accomplish what we can't accomplish on our own. So spiritual practices allow God's grace to flow through us and allow God to work in us to slowly form us to become more like Jesus. We do them in cooperation with God, and as we do that, we are training ourselves to live more like Jesus and to be more like Jesus. Another definition of a spiritual practice that I like is from Richard Foster, and he says that a spiritual discipline or a practice is an intentionally directed action by which we do what we can do in order to receive from God the ability or the power to do what we cannot do by direct effort. So let me explain this. If I want to be a humble person, I cannot make myself be humble, right? I can sure try, but I'm not going to be very good at it. But what I can do is participate in the spiritual practice of serving others. And through that practice, God can grow humility in me. Or if I struggle with desires and thoughts that maybe are not from God, I can spend time meditating on and memorizing scripture so that God can train my mind to focus on those thoughts and the thoughts of God instead. Or if I struggle to always want to seem successful to other people, or that I'm constantly managing my view of myself in front of other people, I want to look good in front of people all the time, silence and solitude can be super helpful spiritual practices because they train us when we're alone with God to put all of those appearances aside and to remember how God created us to be and who God created us to be. Friends, spiritual practices are crucial to our own discipleship and transformation. And this fall, like Pastor Nick said, we want to give you the opportunity to participate in several of them throughout the semester. Some of them you might be familiar with, some of them might be new to you, but either way, I just want to invite you to practice them for a week. Again, we'll share them with you on a Monday, and you'll have the week to practice them. But here's the thing, it's so important that as you're practicing these spiritual disciplines that you are in community with other people. We need other people pouring into us, helping us see what God is doing in our lives. We need to be able to process and reflect on the practices while we're in community. So if you are not in Shift, or you are not in Shape, or you are not in a community group or some sort of small group this semester, I just encourage you to get involved in one. So here's a few things that you can remember as you practice these spiritual disciplines. First of all, do them with Jesus. We need Jesus to help us. We can't do these on our own. Invite Jesus to be yoked with you and to be with you as you try these practices. It's okay to start small, right? I'm not gonna go run a marathon in a week from now and not have trained at all. Start small and gradually build as you need to. Don't give up. Some of them might be really easy, some of them might be very difficult, but that doesn't mean that we give up on them. And 1 week, you guys, is not enough time to be able to see the true benefit of being in this practice for the long haul. So take time, try them out, discern which practices are best for you in this season of your life. You'll get to try a new practice almost every week this fall, but again, it's not enough time to see the true benefit, so I invite you to take some time at the end of the semester to pray and discern which ones God might be inviting you into for the long haul. So as I close, I just want to invite you again, 2 invitations. First, I invite you to be intentional and declare your desire and your intention to be an apprentice of Jesus. You have a choice. Will you choose and intend to be a disciple? Then second, I just invite you to commit to try out these spiritual practices each week this semester. And you guys, I am just so excited to think about what God can do as we are all practicing these things together, how God will transform us individually and how God will transform this campus. So remember, don't do this alone, do this with Him. Invite God into your journey of living the good life.